Hello, we welcome you to this Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. Today we are going to use the information from the childhood of Jesus to study parental responsibility on basic needs. We are going to learn what are basic needs. The basic needs are food and drink, clothing, shelter, protection, community values, that is community values training. God assigned parents the responsibility to provide the basic needs of children, and this will be illustrated through the childhood of Jesus. And everything we learn will be from Matthew chapter 2, Luke chapter 2, and other passages from the Bible. We will begin with God's call to family training. And it's the declaration that he made in Genesis chapter 18, verses 18 and 19, where he basically defined his purpose for parents. Why does he create every child through a parent? So we read, we start by reading, which is unusual. We start by reading Genesis chapter 18 from the NIV version. Genesis chapter 18, verse 18. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him, to keep the word of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. This call to family training actually does two things. It defines parent, because there God defines the purpose of parents. So parents are the people that are assigned this responsibility that God has defined. So the call to family training defines parent, and it defines parental responsibility. It defines parental responsibility, two categories of parental responsibility. One of them is providing basic needs to bring up children, because he said that the responsibility that he has chosen Abraham so that he will direct his children in the ways of the Lord to follow the ways of the Lord by doing what is right and just. So there are two things there. One is he's going to bring up the children, and then the second one is he will train them as they are being brought up. So although this was directed at Abraham, it's actually directed at defining parenthood, responsibility of parenthood. And those responsibilities are provide basic needs to bring up the children, and then train the children, that is, direct them to do what is right and just as they are being brought up. And the purpose of this is to fulfill, so that you bring up the generation in which God will fulfill his promise to Abraham. Of course, God is the ultimate provider, so he provides the basic needs and training to children through their parents. We already read this. It's in Genesis chapter 18, verse 19. Well, providing basic needs and training children will lead us to the question, what are basic needs? How do we know what they are? Actually, in fact, the Bible, believe it or not, defines basic needs for us. We'll find the definition first through Jacob's conditional vow at Bethel. We're going to read it, where he made a vow and said, if God will provide this to me, then he will be my God, and and so forth and so forth. So he made a conditional vow. And in that conditional vow, he actually asked God for a list of 5 things that form the basic needs for a person, the basic needs of a human being. Christ confirmed this through the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. We're going to look at that also. So we have 2 definitions of basic need in the Bible. One through the interaction between Jacob and God, and then another one provided directly by Christ. Well, according to Jacob, in the vow, in the conditional vow he made to God, he said, if God will be with me and will watch over me and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household. So let's go through that list again, because there he's asking for specific things. The first one, he said, if God will be with me, there are 2 things there. One is protect him, protection and interaction. Protect me and interact with me. If God will protect me and interact with me, that meaning of God will be with me. So that introduces 2 needs, interaction and protection. The second one, and will watch over me, that is introducing a need, protection. And then he said, will give me food to eat. We assume here that when he said food, he meant food and drink. So the giving food to eat defines one basic need, which is food and drink. They give me clothes to wear. So that defines clothing as a basic need. So that I return safely to my father's household. There are 2 things there. One is shelter, and then one is something we call home preservation, which is that we preserve a home for him in his father's household so that he can return there. So when we look at the list of all these things, we'll find 5 basic needs. Number 1, food and drink. We classify that as one basic need. Number 2, clothing. Number 3, shelter. Number 4, protection. Number 5, this class of things that we call community values. And we'll look at that in detail, because it actually introduces a lot of things. So food and drink, clothing, shelter, protection, and community values. We'll see that Christ provided the same definition for basic needs. In Matthew 25, verses 35 and 36, Christ was talking about compassion, service, earning blessings through service, compassion. So he said, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. So this actually defines a list of the same needs that Jacob defined in his conditional vow. Let us go through the list. He said, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. That defines food and drink. And we are putting those into one category. That is one basic need, food and drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. That is shelter. Somebody may also say some form of protection, but that is basically shelter. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. That is clothing. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. Those are actually defining interaction, the things we call community values. So again, we see food and drink, clothing, shelter, protection. Protection is not mentioned directly, but it's contained in all these categories. For instance, clothing is a form of protection. Shelter is a form of protection. So going through the list again, number 1 is food and drink. Number 2 is clothing. Number 3 is shelter. Number 4 is protection. And then number 5 is the big one, community values. Well, so let us summarize this. So we have 5 basic needs, and you can see the 5 basic needs actually belong to 2 categories. The first category we call the physical basic needs. This is very important because in our family, when we discuss family training, you see that these define 2 categories of things that parents are expected to do for their children. The physical basic needs are food and drink, clothing, and shelter. Then the non-physical basic needs are protection, and then community values training. Community values will be provided through training. So physical basic needs, food and drink, clothing and shelter. Non-physical basic needs, protection, and community values. Well, let us look at this with respect to the early childhood of Jesus. First, the physical basic needs. These are not mentioned directly, I guess because they are so basic, but there is this statement in Luke chapter 2 verse 40 that says, "And the child grew and became strong." And the child grew and became strong is an indirect way of saying that the parents provided the physical basic needs of food and drink, clothing, and shelter. They are not mentioned directly, but this statement implies that the parents provided these adequately. Parents of the boy provided food and drink, clothing, and shelter so that he grew and became strong. In Luke chapter 2 verse 40. Well, protection is where we actually have an incident reported that shows 2 things. One, in one case, God provided protection, protected the child directly. God intervened directly and protected the child. In the other one, God instructed the parents, showing that these are parental responsibility. He instructed the parents to protect the child. The 2 incidents are related to the wise men from the east called Magi in the Bible, that when Jesus was born, that they came to the area where he was born and started asking. They asked King Herod. They said, "Look, they know that the king of the Jews," they called him, was born, that they saw his star and they want to go and worship him. Well, Herod asked around. He was, of course, negatively concerned about the birth of such a person. So he found out about what time they saw the star. Using that, he estimated the age, and then said, "Okay, you go." He asked for people. People told him it's somewhere in Bethlehem. And he said, "Okay, you go to Bethlehem and look for him. When you find him, come and tell me so that I too will go and worship him." Well, the wise men actually followed their star to the house where the child was being cared for. And there they prayed, worshipped him, prayed for him, and gave him presents. But God intervened and said, "Don't go back to Herod. Take another way home." So that's the first direct intervention to provide protection, because God knew that Herod had no good intentions for the child. And he protected the child directly by telling the wise men to return home without going to Herod. Let us read about this in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 2 and 7 to 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So that was one case where the child needed protection and God provided it directly. But God also knew that Herod would not rest. Herod, in fact, would send his army to go and kill male children of 2 years old and younger. Complete wipeout, a massacre. Well, so God knew about this ahead of time, and he called Joseph and said, "Joseph, take your family and move to Egypt, because Herod is going to try to kill the child." So Joseph immediately woke up. This was in the night. The message came to him from an angel in a dream. So he quickly got up, took his wife and child, took his family, Mary and Jesus, and moved to his family, moved to Egypt that night. So this was a case of God giving instruction to the parents to provide protection to the child. Again, emphasizing that protection is a parental responsibility. Of course, God is the ultimate protector. He provides protection, but he does it through parents. He provides it through a channel to the child, and that channel is the parents. Let us read about this in Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 16. Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. So, this is an illustration of parents providing protection for their child. In one case, God provided the protection directly by redirecting the Magi away from Herod. In the other case, which is the same problem, but to continue the protection, he actually gave instruction to the father and said, "Take your family, move this child to Egypt to protect him from Herod." So showing us there that protection is a parental responsibility. It's one of the responsibilities that he channels to children. One of the provisions that he channels to children through their parents. God is the ultimate protector, but parents provide protection directly to the children. Well, the next basic need, the last one, is the one we call community values. First of all, let's look at this. What are community values? Community values are really wrap up the whole human interaction. There are two aspects of community values. One is compassion. Compassion, which is the same as sensitivity to the needs around you, sensitivity to the needs of yourself, sensitivity to the needs of other persons, and sensitivity to the needs of community. Sensitivity meaning that you recognize, you are attentive enough to recognize the needs around you, and you recognize what you can do to help provide for the needs, and you do what you can do to help provide for the needs. So that is compassion. The second aspect is respect. And there are a lot of things included in respect. There's respect for authority, respect for laws and customs, respect for basic rights of yourself and others. So community values have two aspects. The community values describe the encapsulate human interaction. There are two aspects: compassion and respect. Providing community values to a child through training, of course, is a parental responsibility. Parents have the responsibility to train their children in community values, which means to train their children to become responsible members of community. Responsible and to become responsible and God-fearing adults that respect the values of the community. And this training is usually provided through practice. Well, let's see how we learn this from the boy Jesus. Well, what did the parents do to provide, to train him for community values? There are two sets of things they did. The first set are things they did when he was really too young to absorb any training, but they did these things to show that they themselves are immersed in the community values, immersed in the respect for laws and customs that were handed down in the community from the time of Moses. For instance, they circumcised the child, the boy Jesus, on the 8th day after his birth. So this circumcision actually goes back to God's covenant with Abraham that was handed down to generations of Israelites down to the time of Jesus and beyond. So this is something, it's a part of their custom, but it is actually an instruction from God that they do this. So the parents show the respect for this by observing it. On the 8th day after his birth, they circumcised him. Then they completed what they call the purification period. Parents, the mothers of a newborn child, mothers that have just given birth have to go through a certain period of purification. For the first male child, the period of purification is 3 days. So they went through this period, and then at the end of the period of purification, they are also required to bring him to the church to be consecrated to the Lord, because he is the firstborn male. It is again part of their religious custom handed down from the time of Moses. So the parents practiced these things to show respect for the custom, to show respect for their laws. You cannot train a child in something unless you yourself believe in it and practice it. You cannot train a child effectively, because the training, family training, is an apprenticeship. You train the child as you do things It's not a formal training where you bring people into a classroom and start teaching them. No, you do things and then take the children through the process as you do them. So by practicing these things, even though the child was still too young to absorb it as a training, but by practicing it, they are showing that they believe in these things, and they are essentially preparing themselves to practice these things with their child as he grows. Let us read about this in Luke chapter 2, verses 21 to 24. Luke chapter 2, verse 21. On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise the child, he was named Jesus, the name the angel had given him before he was conceived. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. So they did those. They observe those because they believe in them, and since they believe in them, it means they will do these things in the presence of their child. Then the next set of things they did are actually things that they did with the child as he grew up. The parents took him to Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. They took him to Jerusalem every year to participate in the feast, and by so doing, they taught him the feast was important, they taught him the history, they taught him what it represents. What is Passover? Why do we do Passover? What do we do during Passover? How do we interact with people during Passover? So they took him through this process year after year. Another thing that happened was, after the feast in Jerusalem, it was a long trek home, and during that long trek, they left him free to interact with friends and relations. How do we know this? because in the 12th, when they went for this in the 12th year, when they left Jerusalem, he didn't live with them. And they didn't know that. They had been on their way home for a whole day before they realized that he wasn't in their team. The reason they didn't know that is because they expected him to be among the friends and relations, so they didn't really look for him. They had a practice of letting him mingle and interact freely with the friends and relations. So when they found out he wasn't with them, the first place they looked was among the friends and relations. They thought he would be with them. He wasn't with them. It was then that they realized that they had to go back to Jerusalem. They went back to Jerusalem, and of course they found them there. That's a good account, but what is important that we're learning from this is that every year they took him to this festival, and part of what they did was give him an opportunity to interact freely with friends and relations. So this is an illustration of some of the things they did as parents to train the young boy in community values. Community values training is a key aspect of parental responsibility to a child. Let us read about this in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 44. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. Well, so we learned about the basic needs. What are the basic needs? We learned that how Jesus was, his parents provided the physical basic needs. They were not mentioned directly, but his progression, his physical progression, bore witness to the fact that they provided him the physical basic needs. Then they provided him protection. God had to step in to provide the protection himself, to start it himself, and then directed the parents to continue. And then they provided him community values training. So through the childhood of Jesus, we will learn parental responsibility on basic needs. That the parental responsibilities include providing physical basic needs of food and drink, clothing and shelter, providing protection, and providing community values training. These are things that parents should provide for their children. Community values training is actually very important. And as we learned, there are two aspects of it. Training in compassion is training a child to be sensitive to the needs around him or her, the needs of himself or herself, the needs of other individuals, and the needs of community. Then the second aspect is respect, which includes respect for authority, respect for laws and customs, and respect for basic rights of himself or herself and basic rights of others. And training for community values is usually through practice, just like the case we saw for Jesus. His parents took him to this festival in Jerusalem every year. Well, this brings us to the end of this wonderful Bible study, and we thank you for participating in our Bible studies. We pray that you have learned something that will make positive impact on your life and will help you make positive impact on the life of other people. The most important, will bring you closer and closer to God's purpose for your life. Thank you for participating, and God bless you.